him and I tend to talk for a long time. So we definitely want to encourage everybody to bring up some questions. Nick is he's got a plethora of information in his head, and I think it's fun to try to pick it all out. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me back. I love being on the show. You know that.
I know. It's always great having you on. So let's kind of just jump right into this. We'll give people a couple minutes to filter into the stream here. And actually, why don't we crack this open and pour and just give it a minute to breathe while we wait for some people to pop in. So let me just make sure of something real quick. All right, cool. All right. Oh, good. All right, some people are starting to come in. So this whiskey, single barrel cast strength rye whiskey, you have not released this yet.
No, you're like the 8th person to taste it.
Fantastic. Yeah. I know. Actually, it's funny when I took a picture of this for Instagram and whatever else, people were like, season 1, barrel 1, what? And I'm like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, no, this is so we were really excited about we love the live stream community, frankly. Like I love coming on the show. We went on with Mash and Journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mash and Drum and My Bourbon Journey, but
right.
I did it with both of them. And we thought, you know what would be really fun is to basically tease it and give a sneak peek to the diehards, to the people who really take this stuff really seriously and dig really deep into it. So this we're basically going to announce exactly what it is to the rest of the world in the next week or two. But we just thought it'd be really fun to tease it out here. The other thing is, like, it's a single barrel, right? It's a big single barrel, so we're going to get a fair number of bottles, but even still way less than our usual release would be. And so we were like, well, let's just try to make it available to the communities that are gonna get most invested and most excited about it.
I love it.
So that was really the idea around doing this, which is why I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I love the idea, and I love that you let me try this. Now, it's actually funny. So Nick and I were just talking off stream a little bit about the other channel I have, the Dungeons and Drams channel, and how Jason's on there, and him and I were talking about this bottle after the stream one time, because I noticed that you were on with them, and I was just like, what do you think, whatever. And so we both had a lot of good stuff to say about it, of course.
Awesome.
I mean, I love all the stuff that you do. I do have my favorites, of course, but even that's like picking the 9.5 out of the 10s, so
I appreciate that. This was the most fun project we've done so far. I mean, it's really cool to do blends, because when you do blends, you have so much control. It's so finite, right? You're like, okay, I made the blend, I'm done. Do the test batch, blend it, and it's going to come out within a 0.5% point of exactly how you thought it would come out, right? Like you really, sure, there's a little bit of barrel variation, you get a little oxidation in your samples, but for the most part, it's very, very precise. With single barrels, that's just not the case, right? And particularly for how we had to do it, because there really is no with Canadian whiskey, they're doing 100% corn, 100% rye, 100% barley, 100% wheat, right? So like, there's no single barrel of batch 1, 2, 3, or 4. You could take a barrel of one of the components, but it's not representative of the whiskeys at all. So for us, it was kind of like, how do you do a single barrel program? So essentially what we did was we said,
well, sorry, let me pause you there for just 1 second. Only, so I know if once I get you going,
I know, I'm gonna. So I promise I'll be good today. I'll explain totally the process, and then, but go ahead.
My favorite part, though, is that, like, when people start talking and kind of can't stop, it's usually after they've drank a whole lot. I haven't even had a sip. But it's so funny. Whenever we're starting a stream off, him and I will just talk and talk and talk, and then like it's like a minute after the stream's supposed to start, and I'm just like, I kind of just want to keep chatting. Like, can we just hit go and just everybody else can catch up? So speaking of everybody else, so let me say hi to a few
Yes,
people here.
yes.
So I just because a bunch more people have popped in. So tonight I really want to be engaged with the community here in the chat. So if you guys have any questions about Found North or really anything about whiskey whatsoever, Nick knows a ton of stuff. So ask anything, and between him and I, mostly him, we'll be able to answer it. So so let's go with the first thing from Mark here. So he's asking if Found North is in stores or online only. Now I do know that you guys have the searching feature on your website.
Yes.
But
Yes. Thank you, Mark. I always appreciate that question. Yeah. So basically we are distributed in a bunch of states now. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we're in New York, we're in Florida, Texas. No, not Texas yet. We're looking at Texas, California, Oregon, because Oregon reached out to us, literally the state board, and was like, "We want your product." And we're like, "Okay,
nice.
we don't know how you found us, but awesome."
Was that before or after you just won your awards?
No, it was right after we launched.
Oh, really?
Was like, yeah, we were just like, "How do you know about us?"
That's interesting.
But no, it was fun. But what we do is we use a service provider from our website, which ships to 40 some odd states.
Nice.
So if you go to foundnorthwhiskey.com, you can go to the store locator and see if there's a store near you. If not, you can probably get it just doing direct to consumer through our website.
Nice. So pinch hitter put up the website. Thank you for that, pinch hitter.
Thank you, pinch hitter.
So Joe says the 17 year is an amazing. Now that begs the question, which 17 year? Oh, never mind. There's only one. There's two 16 years. There's one 17. Batch number 3. I was thinking, I'm like, as I was saying, I'm like, I bet I'm gonna be wrong. Yeah, because the other one is 18 actually. So 2 16s, a 17, and an 18. So
yes, yeah. Joe, that batch 3. It's funny. The when we started the company, we assumed that like aged rye would be what was the driving force of our brand. And then of course we made whiskeys batch 2 and 4 that taste like bourbon. And as it turns out, there are a lot more people who drink bourbon than rye. Like, duh. So batch 3 is like rarely the crowd favorite. It's always the big sweet, bourbon bomb, like batch 2, batch 4. But batch 3 is my favorite of the batches that we made. Largely because it's a blend of whiskeys that are 17 to 25 years old. And so we're messing around with a lot of different components that are giving off things that you just usually don't find in old rye, particularly like big, bright fruit notes.
Some stats for people. So the batch 3 is 64% rye, 32 corn, 4 barley, and it's 55.1% ABV. So sounds awesome. I mean, I like it too. Actually, it's funny. These are emptied from lowest to you guys can't see all of it on the camera here, but like the 1 is the most empty, 2 is the second most, all the way up to 4. And it's mostly just because I've had them that length of time. But it's I like them all. I think the number 2 was my favorite of all of them. Either that or I don't recall. I might just have to try them all again.
You have to just run back through.
I might just have to. I did put 4 extra glasses.
Different ways.
So guys, let me know in the chat as well. First off, 2 questions. Number 1, have you guys ever tried Found North, and if so,
yes.
which batch? And if not, what are you guys drinking tonight? So Joe asks, why was the 18 year and 17 years taste so different? The 18 year wood heavy to me. And then hi from Central Florida. I'm so sorry you live in Florida, but hi. Yes.
Actually, Florida's a great market for us. Yeah, we love Florida. Orlando is Found North is big in Orlando. Yeah. So the reason the 18 year, which is batch 4, and the 17 year, which is batch 3, taste so different is because they have completely different grain composition. So 17 years, 64% rye, 32% corn, and 4% malted barley. And the 18 year batch 4 is 80% corn, 19% rye, and 1% malted barley. The reason that the 18 years is more wood heavy is because it's more wood heavy. You actually nailed that right on the head. We used a lot more new oak in that. We also used Hungarian oak, a lot of Hungarian oak. Hungarian oak is cool.
I appreciate
it's very tight grained, but really, really sweet. So it gives a lot of like wood characteristics without it being quite as tannic as just regular new American oak.
if 10 years ago somebody asked me like, or told me that I would have any preference of wood, like I would just assume it had to do with woodworking, not that I became an
Yeah,
alcoholic.
furniture.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so, but it's funny. Like people talk about Hungarian oak or French oak, and I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. So
Yes, yes. Talk. Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. What's this one?
So I've tried batch 1 and 2, have a bottle of each hiding on my special bottle shelf. I haven't gotten to try 3 or 4, but they're on my radar. Nice. So pinch hitter, what did you think between the batch 1 and 2? Which one did you like more? If you need to, you can go sample a couple. But actually, speaking of samples, only so that I can have something to do while we're chatting here. Do you want to take a sip of this new guy?
Yes, please.
So before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about this? Now, I'm sure you know the mash bill by heart. So if
I
not,
Yeah, I know this whiskey by heart. I'm in love with this whiskey. Basically, to create our single barrel program, because we couldn't pull single barrels because
Mhm.
we were working with components as opposed to as a blender of Canadian whiskey. Like we're not working with finished whiskeys. We're working with barrels that really can't be used as single barrels, right?
Mhm.
And so what we did was we created a blend. So we created a blend of 12, 19, and 21-year-old whiskeys. So a 12-year-old rye, a 19-year-old rye, a 21-year-old corn. Blend them
Okay.
together, vat them in a stainless steel vat, let them marry, and then we recast them into 18 different casks. And this is the first pick, right? Ironically, it actually, like, we just arbitrarily numbered them, FN-1, FN-2.
Mhm.
And our first single barrel just happened to be FN-1. That was totally by chance.
Okay.
But basically, it's been aging after we made that blend. It's been recast. They've been aging in their 18 different barrels for the last 8 months or so. This particular barrel, is a level 3 char New
Mhm.
American Oak from Kelvin. Kelvin Cooperage, if you're unfamiliar with it, get familiar with it. They are amazing. They do a weird process where they toast and char their barrels. They do everything by hand, no computerization. They do the charring by scent, which I just think is so badass. And
Yeah,
their
I know.
barrels just yield great whiskey.
That's gotta be just physically like, after a while, I would imagine it would be tough to tell. Like, like you can't do 30 of them in a row because you're just not gonna smell it
That's
anymore
a
or something. I don't.
great point. That's a
Yeah.
really great point because these guys are doing it, right? Like they must be
Yeah.
doing it over and over and over again. How are they not,
Yeah,
like,
that's
because if
interesting.
you're blending whiskey, you sniff the same thing 10 times. You stop being able to smell anything. You're like,
Right.
I think it's whiskey. You know what I mean? Like you get palate fatigue pretty quick. They must be getting it.
It's
Um,
got it. Yeah.
but
'Cause maybe it's just like, oh, it starts smelling sweet, so it's done? Like,
so it's
maybe it's just
done.
not a
Maybe
nuanced
it's
smell that they're
simple.
looking for.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
basically their theory is, my understanding is that they basically, you know, barrels are different. They have different grain, and so if you're just doing it based on time, you're not capturing the nuance of each barrel essentially.
Mhm.
So like they want to be doing it based on other senses, which I just think is really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting. I like that. Alright, so this is, I know that I believe, well, never mind. So, sourcing
yeah,
Canadian cast, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's found North sourcing Canadian cats that are 100% of each type of grain and blending them. Uh, yes and no. Uh, Canadian, so the way Canadian is made and the kind of the primary way that it differs from American whiskey
Mhm.
is they don't need to use malted barley. So like we need to use malted barley because we don't use enzymes, or supposedly we don't, although we're allowed to in the US,
Right.
but it's not talked about. But basically, the enzymes that are in barley will convert starch to sugar. So
Yes. Right.
we created the mash bill because it essentially, the barley in it helps the corn starch and the rye starch and the wheat starch convert into
Mhm.
sugar. In the early 1900s, the Canadians started harvesting, basically cultivating and harvesting enzymes, and then they could use 100% corn, 100% rye, 100% barley. The thing is, they don't always want to. So some of the distilleries that we work with will do both enzymes and they'll put in a little bit of malted barley.
Okay.
So like we don't use casks of malted barley. The percentage of malted barley that's in here is because one of the casks we use, or some of the casks we're using, are 7, 8, 10% malted barley, even though they also have the enzymes.
So that's really funny because I ended up drinking this with my dad. Actually, he was the first person I shared it with, and because he has a couple of your other bottles too, and that was his first thing he commented. He's like, I don't know that I've ever seen 4% malted barley on some, or barley. I think it's
1%.
Yeah, 4% barley on anything.
Batch 2 and 4, 1% malted barley. It's like, why did they sprinkle a little in there? It's like, no, we didn't. It just, there was a tiny bit in the rye we were using.
Let's see, when this coming to Orlando? So I think it's already there, right?
Yeah. 5-star. There are a couple other stores. If you go to the store locator. Oh, are you talking about the single barrel? Or are you talking about Pound North? Yeah. So the single barrel, is our online gift shop only release. We are basically, if actually I sent you the link, Bill, but basically we are only going to release this to people who are on our mailing list. So
if you guys look in the description of the, sorry to interrupt. If you guys look in the description of the video, it's down there. There's a link to go join the mailing list, and then you'll be able to be the first to get this, or possibly the only people to get this.
The only people to get, So because we took a blend and then refilled and basically like recast it into different barrels. We basically started the Angel Share over again. So earlier on, somebody said, why is it one big barrel? It's not that we used a bigger barrel. It's just that when you're dealing with whiskeys ranging from 12 to 21 years old, you would expect them to be half empty. But if you take those blended together and refill barrels, we only have 8 months of Angel Share. Believe it or not, that's still the Angel Share in the first year. Like, people always talk about Angel Share being linear, which is total nonsense. It's usually like 10% the first year, and then it's like 1% or less over time. But then it averages out to whatever it averages out to. So we lost like a little over 10% of this barrel. Nonetheless, it was a full 53 gallon, right? So we're still talking about 200 plus bottles.
I'm a little surprised, just given the history of whiskey, that it's called the Angel Share and not something more related to like taxes. Just thinking about it, like what you were just describing, and obviously I'm very familiar with the concept, but as you were just describing it, all I could think about was like looking at my paycheck, knowing what I make and seeing what I bring home, versus like you're making 100% of this thing, and by the time you pull it out of the barrel, you got like 70% of it, 60% of it. It's just like so disheartening.
Yeah, right. No, I know. I actually, I think historically, the Angel Share was a lot higher than it actually was.
Because people were sampling it.
Because people at the distilleries were pilfering it for themselves, for whatever reasons, for illicit reasons. And I think the Angel Share was actually supposed to be a little bit ironic when they were first saying it, because they were dodging taxes. Excisement extraction.
I like that.
I like that a lot.
So Jeff, I'm glad you like the content. I'm actually going to get to your question in a little bit, because I have a question I want to ask Nick as well about kind of that same topic. So I promise I'll get back to that. If I don't, remind me.
Okay.
All right. So I keep distracting you now. So this whiskey right here, mash bill, again, just for everybody, 66 rye, 30 corn, 4 barley, 54.7%, which is a perfect. I think that's great. I like 55. Like, I found that is my sweet spot, and so 54.7 is about as close as you can get. So good.
Yeah. Sorry, you're about to ask me a question. I'm already about to just jump in and keep talking. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I was mostly just gonna say let's nose this and taste it. So I'm gonna take one of those rare occasions I get for you to walk me through this whiskey. So if I were a person in your showroom, or I don't know, showroom's not the right word, but in your distillery, not the right word either. You know what I mean? If I come visit you in a place that you're handing me a glass of whiskey, you're gonna tell me about this whiskey. So go for it.
So I mean, the reason that single barrels are so cool is because you're deciding when to bottle them without knowing exactly if it's the best time to bottle it or not, right? It could get better, it could get worse. You don't know for certain. And that is inherently exciting. You're basically like capturing this moment of time where
Mhm.
the whiskey tastes a certain way. And so for us, like when rather than just being like, hey, let's bottle this when we arbitrarily think it's at its best,
Yeah.
it's when does it have a really, really distinctive note? Like when does it have a note that
Yeah.
is unusual and really out there? And with this whiskey, it is the toasted marshmallow note.
Yep.
This thing tastes like a s'mores in a glass. There was something about there was just something about the toast slash char level
Mhm.
that captured a little bit of the wood phenol. It almost gave it kind of that like that that what's it called, like the Maillard reaction. They'll like
Oh, I know what you're
when you like
talking about.
grill meat and you get that kind of like
Yeah.
savory kind of browned, like the browned outside of a marshmallow,
Mhm.
plus kind of the custardy, lovely creme brulee vanilla note
Yep.
that you would expect from new wood. Um, and that hits you on the nose
Yeah.
so immediately and so nostalgically, right? Like, and for
Well,
me, there's such an emotional component to whiskey. When I like when you're tasting whiskey, when you're nosing whiskey, your olfactory experience, you actually the place where your brain processes signals from your
mhm.
olfactory glands
Right.
is very, very close to your amygdala. So your like emotional center, like you're really like your lizard brain.
Right.
And
And
so
that's
it
why you've
really
got such a
triggers.
strong tie between
Yeah,
the
that's
2.
why
Yeah.
like when you smell, for me, it's the rug cleaner that my grandmother used to use. Like there's certain houses I go in and I'm like, whoa, I feel like it's my childhood all of a sudden. This
That's
has the
funny.
same reaction for me. This
So
like I knows
fun
this
fact
and I
about me
feel like I'm in a fire.
I take a lot of
Yeah.
pride in toasting my marshmallows. Actually, just like literally just this
Not
last
easy.
weekend. What was that?
Not easy
It's not.
to
It
do
takes
it well.
patience. Yes.
Yeah.
Just this last weekend I took my kids camping actually, which is convenient because they just banned open fires here in Massachusetts because it's just so much of a drought. Anyway, so I was teaching both my kids and these other kids that were with us as well how to toast the perfect marshmallow. And then of course one of them dropped it on the ground and I stepped on it later and it was awful. But I toasted the perfect marshmallow. It was like perfect color brown. Almost very similar to this, probably a little lighter than this color brown in my experience. Anyway, so toasted marshmallows for sure, but like one thing I and we'll get to this when we actually take a sip of this, but the very first experience I had of drinking this,
Yeah.
it was very shallow thought, I guess, because I hadn't quite given it the time yet. But the first thing I noticed was how significant the body of this is for a rye.
Yeah.
Almost like I find ryes have a very strong flavor, but they don't always have a long finish.
Yeah.
And this is, at least in my experience, this has both. Um, I just find that it lasts forever and ever. Actually, I remember I was drinking up with my dad. Actually, I cracked this up there and I took a sip and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do an experiment. And I didn't have another sip for like 5 minutes and I was still tasting it. And it was just awesome. So speaking of which,
God,
I'm going to taste
that's
this now.
awesome to hear. Yes, let's go. Yeah.
So,
I've
right.
snuck like 3 tastes in already. Cheers.
Oh, that's
I know
okay.
I'm
I'm
so
terrible.
bad.
Right.
As
Cheers,
soon
Nick.
as you looked away, even the neck went through.
Mm. Oh, it's just so good. I love that for sometimes with ryes, they can burn too much.
Yep.
And this just doesn't do that at all.
Nope.
But it's such a full-bodied flavor. Actually, this is one of those maybe what do you call it? Not placebo, but it's a power of suggestion. Like toasted marshmallow, absolutely. So there's that. There's something in the finish that I can't quite pick up. It's almost like tinny or metallic or something like that.
Mm.
I need another sip, I think. I just need another sip.
Now I'm looking for it. Power of
Mm.
suggestion.
It's also my first sip of anything for the night, so it could also be just anything else. Mm. Oh, so good. I do see, by the way. So Joe went and signed up for the newsletter. He's hoping to get one of these, but he says, "Do you have any insights on just releasing the 25-year you talked about as a standalone?"
No.
No.
Not because I don't, not because I wouldn't want to, because
Yeah.
you wouldn't like the way it tasted. Not the because they're they're creating these components. Like the way you should think about Canadian whiskey and the way that Canadians make whiskey is Canadians very much see the distillation process as the science of creating the ingredients, and then they see the blending process as the chef in the kitchen, right, with their ingredients. And they really are not creating complete whiskeys during the distillation and aging process. They are trying to create very, very distinct flavors. It's the most common sort of analogy is they're literally making the paints, and then the blender is painting the picture.
You'd think with such science behind it that they would do a better job.
You think they would do? It's really interesting because one of the main questions we ever get is, I think the two biggest questions we ever get are, why didn't you just buy stuff from MGP? You're a bunch of Americans making Canadian whiskey, which I'm happy to answer.
You could be the 500th distillery in the U.S. that's doing it. Yes,
that's right. But the other main question is like, why aren't the Canadians just making the whiskey that you're making? And it's because they don't like it that way. It just baffles me. Like when we make our whiskey and we pour it for the master blenders, the best Canadian whiskey makers on the planet, they're always like, oh yeah, I can see how this is popular down south, down south being
right,
whatever.
US,
but they're like, it's too heavy, it's too strong, they like
black velvet, so what do they know?
They like their whiskey at 40%. And so it's really not a flaw in how they distill and age it. It's in my opinion, it's just a difference in style in terms of how they decide to blend it.
Taylor is another man of another refined man here. He knows the proper way to roast a marshmallow, very slow.
Good man.
Good time. Yeah, very good. Let's see. That's more about Irish whiskey. So let's see. Sup, guys? Have you tried any? No, that's you try the. All right, so that's all about Irish whiskey. Now they're talking about Irish whiskey. So actually, let's take a little detour here. So I had an interesting thought experiment for myself, and I'm going to give it to you too because I just think it will be fun to see what you come up with. So, with no prep whatsoever, I apologize. So I have been asked by my parents to do a whiskey tasting tomorrow. So I went out last night and I bought I had 2 bottles that I'm donating, and then I bought 4 bottles. So the idea was I wanted to buy a bourbon, a rye, a non-peated scotch. So in this case, I went with sherry, a peated scotch. And then I also did an Irish and then a world whiskey, which in this case I'll just tell you, I chose one from Australia. So I'm curious what you would pick for each one of those categories. Now here's the parameters. So the group of people, they know whiskey, but not well. Like they're the kind of people who would walk up to you with like the green label Weller and be impressed with themselves, just because they happen to get it. But that doesn't mean that they know a whole lot about it, right?
Yep.
So something approachable for everybody, but not something that they would typically buy for themselves.
So
let's start with the bourbon if you want. Or scotch, wherever you'd like to start.
So the way I would do it, the way I would do this whole tasting is I would start with like the beginning of whiskey, right? So Annals of Clonmacnoise, 1405, the first record of Irish whiskey being made. So I would probably go like, and for me, probably my favorite, just like approachable drinker of an Irish whiskey is the Powers, the older stuff, either the 12, the John's Lane. I'm a big fan of that whiskey. I think it encapsulates what the Irish do well, by making that really like verdant, bright, kind of like, I always think of the word verdant, like green. You feel like you're in Ireland, right? You feel like it's like a kind of dewy morning in just outside Dublin kind of thing.
Nice.
So that's where I would go with my Irish.
All right, so let me tell you where I went with my Irish. So we'll do this. You tell me what you do, and I'll tell you what I did. So in a similar thought pattern, I didn't go with like the beginning, but I did think what is like a quintessential Irish whiskey, and so I picked something pot still, and so I picked Redbreast 12.
That would have been my other choice. Yep.
So Redbreast 12 is just something I love. The cast strength is like amazing, but I didn't want to just start everybody on cast strength either.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm
Yeah.
actually going to start them. So the Australian one I picked was the Starward Nova, and the idea was that I figured at 40% and influence from red wine, like that is a nice easy opener. So
Okay.
that was kind of
Yep.
where, and plus I thought it'd be fun to tell them all about the what's the word, not sauternes. What's the word, the type of stillet they use begins with an S. I'm totally blanking because I haven't streamed in like 2 months or thought about whiskey all that much. You know, the kind of when you have whiskey that kind of goes in and it's always reusing it because you never fully empty it.
Solera vatting.
Solera, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you. Like, how am I not remembering this?
No.
I knew that was gonna. I was even thinking that earlier today. I'm like, I'm gonna get on a stream and I'm not gonna know a damn thing about whiskey because I've barely thought about it in 2 months. You know. But anyway, so
Okay.
so that's
All
why.
right.
So I went with that, and then I did the Irish whiskey from
And then you did the Irish. Okay, yeah. So my second whiskey would probably be a Scotch.
Okay.
And I would go. You don't want to introduce them, even though basically whiskey made its way from Ireland to Islay, like that.
Mhm.
That's how it. You know, the first record is
Yeah.
like 1494, right next to Lagavulin, basically when King James IV was trying to basically subdue the Lords of the Isles, and he basically learned what whiskey was. So it would have been an Islay whiskey, but I would have skipped
Yep.
over that piece of information
For the practical
and
sense.
yeah, for the practical side, because
Right.
you just
Yes.
can't you pour peaty whiskey and it's over.
Yes.
So I would go with the Scotch. It's interesting because if you're trying to go in kind of an order of like light to heavy, you might pick something ex bourbon aged. You know, you might focus on like a Glenmorangie, like an interesting Glenmorangie, or you know, I'm a huge fan of Bob Blair. Obviously, I've always been in love with Bob Blair. Although I don't love the age stated releases. I loved the vintages more.
Totally
so
agree
not.
with you.
If I was going to go sherried instead, God, I would have for the last like 7 years, I would have said right to Glendronach 15. But when they started blending PX and Oloroso instead of doing all Oloroso, I just thought it got a little too sweet. I like that like nutty dryness that the old school 15-year. Well, there's like 3 generations of the 15-year revival, but like the middle generation, which was my favorite, was 100% Oloroso, non-chill filtered, 46%, super viscous, really heavy, like heavy mouthfeel without being too overbearing. It's kind of just a jacked up Macallan.
I totally was going to go with the Glendronach 15. That was exactly what I went to the store looking for, and they didn't have it, and I was so sad about it because I thought for all the same reasons. I just was like, that would be perfect. So I ended up with the it's funny you said Glenmorangie, because I ended up with the Nectar d'Or or d'Or.
Yep.
How do you say that, by the way? I've never
Nectar.
actually heard it out loud.
I don't know. Honestly, Nectar
d'Or. Yeah. Either I need to learn how to say it by tomorrow, or I'll just say it with conviction tomorrow, and everybody will believe me.
Nectar with conviction, you'll be fine.
So I just
that's a great pick.
I thought that one would go really well because it's just tasty. I figured if nothing else, it'll be good. So
Yep. Okay. So what was my next? So next I would probably go bourbon, right? Like I'd go across the way and I'd go bourbon. And I would. It's interesting for that crowd who like know enough about bourbon. I wouldn't give them just like I wouldn't. Bourbon's so tricky because the reason I find bourbon to be so tricky is because there's basically like 3 categories of bourbon. There's stuff you can always get. There's single barrels that you want, and there's allocated shit that you can never get. Right? So it's like
there's good stuff in all 3 categories,
and there's good stuff in all 3 categories, right? Yeah. So I would probably hunt down an OESK 4 Roses single barrel that's at a lower ABV, a lower proof, right? Like 100. Try to get something at like 51%. OESK is my favorite of the 10 recipes. Absolute and 4 Roses. 4 Roses is like I have just such an emotional attachment to that distillery. I love Brent Elliott. Brent Elliott is like very responsible for my having any experience or any knowledge of blending whatsoever. He's the man, and I think their process is just very, very differentiated. And of all the bourbon distilleries, they're by far the most upfront about the fact that like they're blending just like everyone else.
Right.
It's not called a blend; it's a straight bourbon because it's from the blend. But like every distillery,
Yeah.
they quality control by blending. They make new whiskeys by blending. Like they're all blending.
Otherwise, everything's a single barrel, and it's like
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
like everything's different, and you'll
So,
never have the same thing. Totally.
I just think that would be where I would go next.
So that's so funny. You and I are totally on the same wavelength. Like my
What'd
first thought, actually, not even my first thought, like my first, second, and third thought were Four Roses single barrel. Actually, at first I was like, oh, maybe like the Four Roses small batch,
Select,
and I was like, nah, something
or
better.
Small batch select,
and then I was like, maybe
yeah,
Four Roses single barrel, and then I was like, but which recipe? And am I going to be able to find it? So then I started thinking, I'm like, you know what? I bet a lot of these people have had the Four Roses single barrel, so let me go for something different. Not terribly different though, because I still wanted them to be able to find it. So I ended up going the Old Forester 1920.
Great
Totally. I just love that one again. Plus, I figured at that point, I think that's probably going to be like my fourth in line as far as stepping into it. That now you're getting up to like the mid 50%, and people are going to start having a little bit more fun. And I thought that would make a good pick. So, but I love that you so far 2 out of 2, we were kind of totally on the same page.
The thing I love about Old Forester is they're again like very upfront about heat cycling. They've started to do
about heat cycling.
Heat cycling. Their temperature. Yes, okay. They're using temperature control warehouses. Yep. And it's like, sure, of course, it's not the traditional way of just letting the weather dictate how your whiskey ages, but at the same time, like, man, it gives them precision and control. And their 4-year-old stuff doesn't ever have that raw rye note, right? Like it's so interesting when I taste bourbons. A lot of times I feel like sometimes the corn can taste overcooked and the rye can taste undercooked almost. Like you get that kind of like that vegetal note from the rye that hasn't it like literally hasn't seen enough extraction. And when you're temperature controlling and heat cycling the way they are, like you start to get a lot of precision with exactly how you're getting your extraction. When I love what Old Forester's doing. I think that's a great pick. That's a awesome. great pick.
Cool. Well, Nick Taylor approved. Awesome.
Nick Taylor approved. Yeah. And then what was our next pick? A rye.
So let me pause for a minute just to talk to some of the people in the chat here. So Jeff, I saw you saying that it was first time ever interacting with the live, so I'm glad you decided to, because you kicked us off on a good topic. Let's see what else we got to happen to be on. Oh, never mind. Going to Wilderness Trail. Have you been to Wilderness Trail before, Nick?
I haven't been there yet. I love Wilderness Trail.
Yeah, I know that Julio's, he does a lot of single barrel picks with them.
Yeah.
He's there. It seems like he's there every few months. I always see pictures of him on Insta.
For good reason.
So yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I guess so guys in the chat, if any of you have any questions, don't let us just talk the whole time, although we will. Feel free to ask whatever you'd like. All right. So we've done Irish, we've done unpeated Scotch, we've done bourbon. Rye. We could do world, peated, or rye.
Okay. So I would go rye next.
Okay.
And I would pour Found North single barrel 1.
No, it's so funny. I was just like, it's too hacky, Bill. Don't make the joke. I was like, I know what I do for the rye.
No, honestly,
but like, it's your product. You're allowed to.
Fine, I'm allowed to do that. I think the interesting thing about using a Canadian rye is the Canadian ryes represent most of the old ryes on the market, including the old quote unquote American ryes. So much of it is sourced from Canada. So much. If it's got a substantial age statement on it, whether it's, I always feel weird naming names because because I'm in the industry and it's not kosher. But look, if it has a big age statement on it, it's probably from Canada. And the reason is that Americans stopped making rye until 20 years ago. There was a little bit of rye, but the number of cases sold in the US in 2000 was like I think it was like 80,000 cases or something out absurd, which is what Johnny Walker does like every 2 hours. You know what I mean?
Right?
So it's
Yeah,
like
man,
no,
80,000 cases. That's so little.
it
And
was so little that the category was
yeah,
almost completely dead 20 years
I
ago in the
totally believe it
US.
too. Ever since I started this channel, like I've always loved ryes. Actually, the very first rye I did on the channel was bullet rye. And I remember, I think it was, maybe it wasn't the first rye I'd ever had, but it was up there. And I remember even just being like, even this is really good. And it was, the
Yeah,
95.5 mash bill. I was like, this is solid for what I would consider to be kind of like entry level rye. Um, but yeah, man, I love rye, but I wish it would take off a little bit more.
it
So
it it's funny because I find what I've found is and I really don't mean to keep bringing it back to our whiskey, but
well, I
what I've
suppose you're allowed.
I guess I'm allowed to at this
Yeah.
point. But what I think is really interesting about rye is conceptually people like the idea of rye. Rye evokes a lot of really
Mhm.
cool, like big spice.
Yeah.
I think High West really brought
Mhm.
rye back to like the cowboy scene, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you get this
The
feeling of like,
rendezvous and all that
I
stuff, yeah.
love this. But the fact is like Americans love bourbon, which is
Right.
incredibly sweet, right? And rye
Yeah.
is like
Big shock.
spicy, astringent, and really and we kind of learned a lot about that when we made batch one because we were like,
Mhm.
we're gonna make a rye drinker's rye. We're gonna make something that's really like a big time spice bomb. And I love batch one. And people gravitated towards batch two because it was an 80% corn and it tasted like a bourbon. And we were like, oh, okay, well, what the
Yeah.
hell?
Big
So I think
surprise. Yeah.
I think for two reasons. One, there's such young rye on the market right now that it's hard to
Mhm.
have a lot of high quality rye. Two,
Hmm.
because it's so scarce, it's expensive. So a lot of the ryes that have any real age statement coming into the US often are very, very overpriced compared to the quality of the liquid. And then the last thing I would say is I think that rye does really, really well with more exposure to both time and then new oak.
Mhm.
It needs time in the barrel oxidizing to sort of develop those fruit notes and simmer down a little bit. And then you put the new oak on it, which is basically our thesis at this point.
Yep.
Then you hit it with oak, and it adds those like rounded out vanillins that we really love from bourbon. And then
Yep.
you get this really long finished balanced rye that has the sweetness to match the spice, that has the depth of character. And that was honestly that's what we were going for with this whiskey
Yeah.
was let's get that. When you started saying, "Hey, this finish is like
I was gonna
this
say, so the
this
thing I like the
lingers,"
most
I
about
was
this
just like,
whiskey is something you did
"Yes,
on purpose.
thank you." Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
If you
So
remember, I did that the same thing last time we talked too. I forget what it was, but I pointed out something and you were like, that was exactly what I was trying to do. Or, or
yes,
we
I
were
know,
trying
I
to do.
know. I'm
Yeah.
pumped that you're all over what we're trying to do because
Oh,
honestly, like when you're in the lab, and by in the lab, I mean at my dining room table that has 300 whiskeys on it right now.
yep.
But when you're in the lab and you're like, you're just banging your head against the table trying to get the whiskeys just right, you
Yep.
get so tunnel visioned. You know what I mean? You're just like,
Yeah.
and
Is
you
this even
have
good? Yeah.
you start
Yeah.
being like, okay, I've been trying to do this one thing for the last like 6 weeks, and I've been trying to do it probably pretty drunk every day.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so by the time you start pouring it for people, you start second guessing yourself. You're like, is anybody gonna like get what we tried to do here? So when people say like, oh, yes,
Mhm.
I get this, you're like, oh, thank God I wasn't just in my own
That's
world
great.
here.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because it probably seems very obvious to you, but it was very insightful as far as hearing you say it about the older ryes not being from here. Only and because most of the ryes that I've had, I would say if there is any downside is that sometimes they're like too young. They're
Yeah.
not smooth at all. But I've just come to take that as like, oh, it's rye spice. Now, I mean, I'm a guy that likes to eat incredibly spicy foods too. So like strong flavors are a thing I love. So I love heavily peated. I love really hot wings. I love everything. Like the other day I was at a friend's house and he picked a jalapeno right off the plant. And he's like, oh, I've been growing these. They're actually like a cross between this and this. And I think that they're really hot. I just took a big bite out of it. Like actually like the entire thing all the way up to the stem. I will say that it was actually like way hotter than I expected. I had to like stand up and walk around a little bit. And like for anybody, like jalapenos can be freaking hot, like way hotter than you think that they can be. Anyway, because I've had this is total tangent. So I had this one hot sauce one time. It was 450,000 Scoville, and which is just absolutely insane. And it was in a plastic bottle, and after a little bit of time, the plastic actually started kind of corroding. And I don't know if it was just dry rot or if it was the stuff inside, but I would believe it was the stuff inside. So I mean, I've had as hot as they make, and a jalapeno made me react, and that was kind of a humbling experience. Anyway, back to the rye. So I love that this is smooth and it doesn't have that crazy bite the way that some of these younger ryes do, but it still lets you know that it's rye. Like it's
all right. So just to get really nerdy on the taste of on the flavors of rye,
please do.
When rye tastes young to me, it's when it tastes very, very vegetal, right?
Yep.
It like tastes green, right? Like not like bright floral. I'm talking like it tastes almost like you're biting into a celery stick. You know, it just has that very cellulosey kind of vegetal flavor to it. And that to me gets misconstrued as like, hey, this is just rye spice. It's like, no, that's just young whiskey.
That's young
that happens
whiskey,
to be rye, right? Like
if you taste that in a bourbon, you'd be like, this is terrible.
You'd be like, what is this? But people are like, oh, it must just be rye. No, when rye starts to age well, it tends to start throwing a lot of baking spices. And that's why we love it in older bourbons, because it starts giving you that kind of like cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, like those flavors get more pronounced, and they get a little bit it's not sharp, but it's like it's like heft, right? Like and I think I've always thought the music analogy makes so much sense with flavors of whiskey, because like when somebody plays an instrument, it's not just the order and the timing of the notes, it's also the dynamics, right? Like some music can have so much more texture, but be the exact same
like
notes.
If you build upon the from one note to another kind of thing. Is that what you mean? Or
I also mean just like, you know, when that famous drum solo that's like dugga dugga dagga 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 dagga, right? That has that like, that's like that really famous. It's actually just like very basic notes, but it's where you're hitting the accent and it's how you're creating depth of sound. Basically, it's like, it's not just like the order and the notes, right? It's how much texture and how much sound did you provide to that note? Whiskey's the same way. When rye spice is done really well, it's not just like, oh, hey, I taste a little cinnamon. It's like, wow, that cinnamon is so resonant that I'm tasting it for 20 minutes. And that's when rye starts to, I'm trying not to swear too much, kick ass, like really starts to do really well. And I think what's tough about rye is it's naturally very astringent. So tannin is that like nice, like mouth coating dryness. Astringency is that really like sharp, poke you in the back of the throat with a pencil sharpness.
And you get none of that in this.
And that just takes like a lot of time to round out. And so I think like I would love to see people be a little bit more patient when they're producing rye. That you don't have to release it at 2 years old as a cask strength. Like give it 6 years, give it 8 years. And I think we'll start seeing rye's reputation be built more on its flavor as opposed to the connotations that we have with it.
So that's an interesting thought too. So if you're releasing really young rye at cask strength, you're kind of leaning on the fact that people are going to sip it and be like, whoa, this is strong, to cover up the youngness of your rye. That's kind of funny. I hadn't really put that together, but it makes perfect sense. So speaking of rye, so all right, let's say you couldn't, well, you know what?
Get this.
Now you're allowed. You can pick your own.
I picked my own rye. Let's move on to, I would go, so it's interesting because you go, if I were going international, I'd probably end with peat unless I was doing an international peated single malt.
Yep.
But I'll leave that out of there.
Well,
I,
so
I
just real quick, let me
yeah,
tell
go
you what
ahead.
I picked for my rye. So I
Okay,
did.
yeah.
I
Oh,
ended up,
sorry. Yeah, give me your
no,
rye.
it's okay. So I ended up there's a reason I picked this, but I ended up picking the Pikesville, or just Pikesville rye for the rye that I wanted to do, and the reason for it is that was the rye that, although in hindsight, I don't think I love it as much as I did back then. It was what turned me on to rye. So my hope was to make rye lovers out of some of these people. I just remember it being very like chocolatey and kind of it challenged some of the thoughts I had about rye, mostly that I had developed with like bullet rye, of being like, oh, it just tastes like rye spice. This one was like, oh, there's some definition here, there's some depth. But if I could have gotten my hands on it at the time, I think I probably would have picked what's the name of the brand? New one out of New Riff. I probably would have done New Riff rye. Yeah, that would have been my first choice. I couldn't find it. So
I love New Riff. I love
me
their
too.
story.
Everything that I've had from them has been awesome.
I love the way the owner sold Party Source to his essentially to his employees so he could found New Riff. I think they do.
Yeah,
I think they're awesome. Yeah, New Riff
agree.
is such a, yeah, you pulled a rabbit out of the hat there. Particularly if I were going to do an authentically American rye, I'd go right to New Riff.
Nice. So
yeah.
we have two different whiskeys left to pick. So we have World Whiskey and peated whiskey. And for anybody who's joined us in the last 20 minutes or so, basically we're picking a whiskey from one of 6 groups: bourbon, rye, unpeated Scotch, peated Scotch, World Whiskey, and Irish whiskey. I left out Canadian. So, well, actually, it was funny. I found myself, this is all for a whiskey tasting I'm hosting tomorrow night, but I found my biggest limiter was that I actually did want to include Canadian, but I also wanted to include, like, I wanted to do Indian in there too, and not just world whiskey, but I wanted to do a whole bunch of other stuff. And I was like, I can't give these people 10 different drinks because,
right,
they're at my parents' house and it'll be a problem. If it was somebody else's house, I'd do it all day. But so, speaking of which, any chance you can make it down the Cape tomorrow?
I will be down on the Cape tomorrow. Hilariously.
Yeah.
Man. So world whiskey is hard because the problem with doing a world whiskey is it's almost invariably going to be a single malt, right? Like,
yeah,
if you're not, I mean, excluding Canada as a world whiskey,
yep.
Basically all of the really interesting international whiskeys are single malts. There are a few, like, there's a really cool little company that makes like 6, 7, 8-year-old ryes out of Poland. That's really good. I'm forgetting the name. There are a couple like funky things that are happening around the world, but for the most part, the like really reputable internationals are, that's it.
Or
the really reputable
Langlander. I don't know. Those are the 2 that come up right away. So.
Forget about it. I'd have to go. I'd have to. It's in my cabinet upstairs.
Yeah.
But no. I think I'd have to go. with the single malt. I think I'd have to go Kavalan.
Yeah, I was tempted. Yeah.
I just like look. I think it's a Jim Swan distillery, Dr. James Swan, who was just the master at making warm weather climate single malt. And he's kind of our generation's most brilliant distiller that nobody knows. RIP, died a few years ago. But
you got me all hyped up that there was going to be more.
And then, no, yeah, he's had his hand in, like, it's actually absurd. It's like Milk and Honey, Kavalan, Amrut, like Kilhoman. You go through all the single malt distilleries that have been built in the last 20 years, and it's either Jim Swan was there, consulted, or advised. Do you know what I mean? Like, he had over 100 different international projects. I mean, he was a genius, and he was very, very good at designing not just the still, but the entire process to basically optimize it to age well, quickly, and in warm weather, which is very difficult. Single malt generally doesn't do well at 3 years old. So to
Right.
do it well in warm climates at 3 years old is incredibly difficult. And then his prodigy was Ian Chang, who's also just a mad scientist, genius, really soft spoken, really brilliant guy. And I think that the Kavalan whiskeys they're really cool. They're really off the beaten path, and it would either be that or, I mean, if I could get my hands on a Japanese whiskey, a probably a decent one. The problem is that the stuff that you can get access to these days is
not
the
great.
kind of bottom of the barrel that they have available.
Possibly not even Japanese whiskey.
Yeah, right. And it's such a bummer. Or you're buying Chichibu for like $350 for a 4-year-old. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like,
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's really tough.
I thought very hard about doing a Japanese whiskey. So part of the problem too is, so this whole event is for charity as well. So people are basically, I think they're paying like $25 or something to just have, a sample of each of these whiskeys hosted by the Whiskey Dick. So
you only have a certain budget.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, it's more, my parents were like, you could buy whatever you want, but I was like, well, every dollar I spend is money not going to the charity, because, you guys are going to pay me to pick up whatever I pick up. So I'm donating a couple of bottles. That way I could buy better stuff for the other 4.
Right.
So, but that was part of it. Cause actually Kavalan was a big potential choice for me as well as Japanese, but I was like, either one of those is going to blow half my budget. So
yeah. I Star Wars, such a good pick. I think you made a good Australian and
the Solera.
I think it's a good direction. Should I pick my peated Scotch or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like having you go first. This is good.
All right.
Although mine actually, mine's a little boring, so I'll just say it first. So it's fantastic, and I'm happy about it, but it's not whatever. So I just picked Ardbeg 10 because I was like, I freaking love Ardbeg 10. Sounds great, and there's a good chance that none of these people have had it before, and I figured that would be a good one to say, like, it doesn't have to be Lafroig 10. It doesn't have to taste like a Band-Aid, which also, I do kind of like that, but I always liked Ardbeg 10 a little bit more, or quite a bit more, actually.
If you want to get like super geeky, like really, really geeky. So one of the really interesting things about pot distillation is your heavier compounds are coming off the still at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're distilling things that have like phenols, right? When you're basically like trying to capture the phenols, where you take your low cut. So not where you start taking the hard cut, but the very last bit of the hard cut that you take. So you're like the low end of your hard cut. Really dictates to not only the level of peatiness, but also the style of peatiness. So I remember reading that Lafroig takes the lowest cut in the industry, in the Scotch industry, at 58.5, which to give you like a reference point, Macallan, I think, takes it at like 67 and change, something up there. So like you're talking about 8.5 percentage points of butanol and phenols and
that's quite
medicinal gunk, right? I believe Lagavulin is very close to Lafroig at 59.5, and I believe Ardbeg is 61. So it's a little fresher. I've always thought Ardbeg tastes just like a little bit more minty and fresh than Lagavulin and then Lafroig, which has its reputation. And so I think an Ardbeg would be a great choice. I think I'd probably go Ardbeg. I think I'd probably go Ardbeg 10 as well. Honestly, I think not to be.
There's a good reason you and I like each other. I really
I think
we are so on the same wavelength.
If I had more budget, I would go like with the Ardbeg roller coaster or one of the super legendary Ardbeg releases. But no.
Well, Taylor actually this is Port Charlotte 10 was actually what I went there to buy, hoping maybe it was on sale. Because Port Charlotte 10 I think was $68 where I am versus like 54 with the, like, I really was trying to pinch pennies a bit and try to make intelligent decisions. But yeah, I really thought about doing Port Charlotte 10. That one's one that I really like giving people and just being like, what do you think of this?
I
So,
don't believe
but
port char so I might be wrong on this. My
mhm.
Scotch knowledge is a little out of date at this point. But I don't think Bruichladdich uses, I don't think they use marine-based peat. So they
Mm.
are not using dried seaweed. They're using dry basically heather. So
Heather?
basically like
Okay. Yeah.
so
There's
yeah, like peat
yeah.
the peat bogs for Ardbeg,
Hmm.
Laphroaig, and Lagavulin are essentially all below sea level.
Right.
And so the decomposed organic matter is like dead sea life, right?
Yeah.
Versus there's tons of peat all over Scotland and actually on Isla that is all decomposed like heather and whatnot. And so it doesn't give you that classic Isla iodine, super salty, kind of oystery, smoky
So
quality to it.
Alpha Crown confirms that they're using Highland peat.
They are
Um,
using Highland peat. Okay.
Yeah, so that makes it. It's funny. Well, I was distracted there. I was looking at my own. Half the time, like I don't remember, I don't retain the stuff as well as you do. So I was looking at my own notes from my own episode to see what kind of peat I mentioned it used. And just as Alpha was there, I was like, "Yep, right there, Highland peat." So,
I
yep,
remember that from taking the tour in 2014. That's literally I'm
that's a little bit more
I'm a
memorable than
whiskey
doing an
psychopath.
hour of
Yeah,
research.
no,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah. So something real quick. So you had mentioned that if you still want to do it, there was a potentially a free shipping thing going
Yes.
on. Okay, I
Yeah,
just yeah.
guys, for those of you who haven't had batch 1, 2, 3, or 4, look, if you're in, Massachusetts, actually batch I shouldn't have said batch 2 because batch 2 is literally sold out countrywide. But if you haven't had 1, 3, and 4, and like you may be able to find it at a local store. But we just wanted to make it a little easier for you guys to get it tonight. So we made a what's it called, a discount code.
Mhm.
It's the Whiskey Dick. Um, if you yep.
Yep.
If you enter the discount code the Whiskey Dick on our website, we're giving free shipping wherever you
Nice.
are. That way you don't have to just like go slogging around looking for it. You can just order it.
Yeah.
Batch 3 is if you're really interested in like old, fruity, interesting rye, batch 3 is the way to go. If
Mhm.
you want the John Barleycorn Canadian whiskey of the year, go with batch 4.
There
Hey,
you go.
shameless plug, right? No. I'm so bad at this. I always hate. Zach's like, why didn't you mention my brother and co-founders? Like, why
Yep.
didn't you mention like we won a
The
really big
awards.
award?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, because I don't like to like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I like
Yeah. So
talking
I will
about the
tell you something,
whiskeys.
just as like an outsider looking in.
Yeah,
There's so many different awards that get put out every year. Honestly, it's hard to know which ones are worth anything,
yeah.
or like are impressive. So what exactly did you win? Did you guys win again?
So all right. So basically, there was a great shit. Who wrote the art? There was a great article the other day describing the different awards in whiskey.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
okay.
and and basically like San Francisco is like the Oscars.
Right. Yeah.
It's like kind of like the big show, and it's the most sort of it's the most prestigious.
Mhm.
And he said the John Barleycorn Awards is like the critics awards. It's like the all the people are actually doing the um who are actually doing the judging are like very, very serious whiskey writers. So
Right.
it's like McCarthy, what's his first name? McCarthy, who's the head guy, and then it's Fred Minnick, and then it's
Mhm.
there are a bunch of James Beard Award winners. It's really a lot of kind of the people's who opinion that I really care about. But one of the main reasons we entered it into the John Barleycorn Awards is because the John Barleycorn Awards usually have a bit of um, in my opinion, have a bit of an American palate.
Okay.
It tilts very much to the American palate, and for us, we're a very weird whiskey in the sense that, like, yes, we're blending very sort of like distinctive Canadian whiskey, but it is geared towards our palates, and our palates, frankly, are much more aligned with American whiskey drinkers than Canadian whiskey drinkers.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was like, all right, let's put this into an award cycle that is very, very geared towards the American whiskey style. And let's just see how we do. You know what I mean? We're like, oh, we'll just see how it goes. And then both the whiskeys won double gold, which means that
I know that
all
was
the
so funny.
panelists gave it gold.
When I
And
saw that, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I didn't even think they were entering these things yet. Like,
no,
I mean,
I know.
you don't have, an insane amount of it either. Like, if it blows up,
I
you're
know,
gonna sell out.
We're gonna sell out. So
Yeah.
it was fun. Batches 1 and 2, we entered into SFWSC, so the San Francisco, and they both won double gold, which was fun.
Very nice. Congratulations.
And then 3 and 4, awesome. We were like, all right, let's put these into John Barleycorn and see how they do on the American side. And they both won double gold, and batch 4 won best Canadian whiskey, which was like,
that's so cool.
Holy cow.
Man,
congratulations. Talk about being huge. Like deep in your own zone and being like, when we released it, I was like, man, is anybody going to like these? You get so into your own head. You're like, are people going to enjoy this whiskey? And then I was like, oh, yep. Yes, they are. Okay, great.
The OSWA awards are something to look out for, but it would be quite difficult for you guys to get. Yeah, I would think so. But I don't know.
Hey, well.
Yeah. Awesome. So, okay. So here's the deal. So anybody who wants to go buy a bottle of this, use the code, the Whiskey Dick, no spaces, all probably lowercase, doesn't matter, but it's DIC. You'll get free shipping. You should definitely do that. There's a reason that, so for many of you, you've probably noticed I've been gone for the last like 2.5 months, and Nick was the reason I've come back. So, because I don't miss a chance to stream with Nick. And this stuff is amazing. Look for it. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll find out about it being released. And, I imagine they'll be able to order it off your website, right? I think that's what you were saying.
Yep, we'll basically announce all the specs on it. We'll send an email out that will be hey, it's live, and it will be a first come first serve, and it will sell out. I don't think it'll sell out. I think it'll sell out. I'm hoping that it'll sell out in hours as opposed to minutes. Then we're gonna really piss some people off. But it's gonna sell out fast.
Roughly, how many bottles are you looking at? Do you know?
I think so. It depends how many Zach and I want to drink on our own.
So like 4. There'll be like 4 left.
So it'll be like 4 or 5 bottles left.
How about 3 and send me another one?
I think we'll probably release 200 bottles. And
okay. Yeah,
we'll save some for we'll definitely enter it into some of the award cycles because we just think it's really fun and really good. And then you got to put away when you do your first single barrel. Yeah. We made the bad mistake of we have like 4 cases of batch 2 left, which is, it sounds like a lot. It's so little. You can't imagine how many like nice, important people in our lives come up to us and are like, hey, can we get a bottle of batch 2? It's like my dad. It's like, can I get a case of batch 2? I'm like, Dad, no.
I have so little left.
No, that's a quarter of what I have left. You can have a pour from my bottle that I've been nursing.
That's already open. Yeah. That I'm nursing. Yeah, exactly. No, I totally like the single barrel I did with 3 chord. Like I took the bottle number 1. I made a thing up on the wall, and so I got the barrel head from the barrel that it was in, and I made I can't move the camera right now, but actually, you know what I can do is I can do this, because some people haven't seen this. So if I change cameras over here,
now,
so you'll see up on the wall, I've got bottle number 1 with the barrel head that I put a lacquer or whatever else on it, so it'd be cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think it came out pretty good. Anyway, so. Any last questions for Nick here? Other than that, go buy his whiskey. Seriously, obviously it's good, and I'm not the only one that thinks so. But I think you guys will all love it because you're all into whiskey the way that we are. So, awesome. People are saying cheers. Oh, Steve just ordered a bottle of 04. Nice, Steve. Let's see, summer break, many whiskey, blah blah blah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll just sign off then. So thank you, everybody, for joining us here on the Whiskey Dictionary. Thank you, Nick, as always, for being an awesome guest. And I wish you very much luck with your first single barrel release. And I look forward to trying number 2.
I was gonna cheers you, and
let's do it.
I can't do it with an empty glass, so I just okay. Wait a sec.
Hey,
man,
I told Nick
Yeah,
I
go
didn't
ahead.
want to drink too much tonight. This is now my fourth pour. So
Yeah.
that's
Whoops.
that's on me. That's
No,
not on you.
we did pretty good. I've been pouring little like thimble pours for myself, like
In the
one sip
past,
pours.
when we've done this, I've taken all 4 of these bottles and had more than one of each, like, with you. So, but that's on the
Yeah,
2-hour
you get
streams
wrecked
that
pretty quickly.
we're supposed to be an hour, and we just keep going because it's fun. So anyway, all right. Cheers to you. Cheers to your first single barrel release. Congratulations on all your recent awards. Stop being so awesome, because pretty soon you're not going to want to talk to me anymore. So
that literally will never be true. Thank you, pinch hitter at answered the one question that we missed in there that we can't actually disclose the.
yeah. I actually skipped
honestly,
that question on
you
purpose.
skipped it. Yeah, honestly, guys, like we can't. They won't even send you samples if you don't sign an NDA.
Right.
So literally, it's just like it's over. And we tried to Easter egg it. We're like, hey, can we put like a map in the topographical map of where? And they're like, no, absolutely not. So no, it's a hard no. But hey, man, I love coming on this show. I love the questions from everybody. Really, really appreciate it. It's great for people to be on here on a Friday night with us. It's really awesome. So, cheers.
All right, cheers, everybody. Go buy
Thank
his
you, guys.
whiskey. Be real.
Cheers. Clever.